Oi, oi, it's your boy, Jack Slack, coming at you midweek on the Jack Slack Boicast. And today, we're going to be talking about UFC 296. What looks like it could be a lot of fun. We're in Vegas, but we're not at the Apex, obviously, because it's a pay-per-view. We're in front of a live crowd, and we've actually put a lot of effort into this card. There's a couple that don't feel that interesting. T. Ferg versus Paddy Pimblett, maybe. Well, we'll talk about that in a minute anyway, but there's a lot on this card that does interest me. And there's a lot on this card that should interest me, but I'm a bad fight fan, so I don't actually care that much about Josh Emmett versus Bryce Mitchell or Irene Aldana versus Carol Rosa. But let's get into it on the main event. Leon Edwards versus Colby Covington. Watched a load of Colby Covington this week, like a whole UFC career. Haven't watched that much Edwards, but I've seen quite a lot of Edwards in my life anyway recently. That made it sound like we go out for coffee. We don't. I slap him around in sparring is what happens. I'm not going to Birmingham for love nor money. Leon Edwards. I should be standing him because he's a British UFC champion and probably the best fighter that Britain's ever produced skill-wise. I'm more standing because he's got a really... I'm going to say interesting. I say interesting a lot, but I'm going to say interesting style. But for a lot of people, it isn't that interesting. He has a style where I feel like he could actually murder people if he just put a little bit more aggression into it. Whereas Colby Covington's got a sort of like the opposite thing where he's ultra aggressive all the time, but in a way that he doesn't inflict a lot of damage. I saw someone describe his win over Max Griffin as a mercy stoppage. He gets the Dagestani handcuff, folds him down, and throws punches, and like Max Griffin's not doing anything because he's absolutely exhausted. But Colby's not like loading up these punches to get a stoppage. So I think it's Mark Smith just steps in and goes, oh, go on then. That can be a stoppage. That's a TKO. And I believe, aside from Tyron Woodley, that's his only stoppage in 7 years. Tyron Woodley guillotining himself to a rib injury. But, we're not doing Colby Covington's boring because he can't get stoppages because Leon Edwards doesn't typically get stoppages. That's why the Kamaru Usman second fight was such an anomaly. I've seen people call it a fluke, even after he took Usman apart in the third fight. But I think I made a good read on that one because having watched the second fight going into the third fight, I said I thought he did really well in the first round and then gassed very obviously. And I think if it isn't at elevation in Utah, I think he can probably carry that through the fight, and he did. There is a case to be made for Usman slipping a bit too, and obviously having some jitters over having gotten headshot deaded or whatever we were calling it. I'm just glad Leon got a soundbite after three-piece and soda? Or hey, Masvidal sucker punches someone and doesn't actually offer them a fight. That's the coolest shit in the world in 2019 or whatever it was. Jamal Hill sucker punches his brother, and suddenly we've got a problem with it. Drama going on outside the cage. I think that was last week, so I don't need to go into that too much, or at all. Drama is something that this fight's actually been lacking quite a bit because the whole selling point, I don't know, Colby's managed to convince the UFC brass that he's like the only man who can move pay-per-views at welterweight. And then any sort of, because we don't get pay-per-view numbers, we do get indicators on like how much people care. And, it's normally people bring up the view counts on the countdown to UFC episodes. And this one's just doing meh. It's not doing badly, but it's doing meh. It's not like if Conor McGregor were fighting. Or, I mean, obviously it's unfair to compare everything to Conor McGregor, but who's a draw? People typically use Jones, maybe Hamzat, maybe Habib. If they were fighting, those countdown episodes, the numbers would be through the roof. But then the countdown episodes are also skewed by the fact that if a hot girl's there, people click on it going, well, maybe she'll be in a bikini. Or some leggings that are really, really tight. I always remember years ago, Kat Zingano's stretching pre-workout, open workout stretching video was like one of the best performing videos the UFC had ever put up on their channel. And it was like, oh yeah, people are like that. But yeah, drama-wise, these guys, Colby Covington's trying, and Leon Edwards is not really engaging. But that could be, you could see that and go, well, Leon Edwards, he's put against the most interesting man in welterweight, and he can't even sell that fight. You could also look at it like, he's been told that this fight's happening because Colby Covington's the biggest draw. Let him draw. You do the promotion, mate. I'm just here to win fights and be the best in the world. It is weird though, because like you say anything about Colby's style or like the shtick, and there's 3 or 4 crypto guys on Twitter will be like, "Oh, how dare you, sir," and get mad about it. He's got a weird sort of online Trump adjacent cryptocurrency semi-following, but there's only a few people who are really passionate about it. He's not like I think the whole thing was like he's going to bring the power of the MAGA movement to the pay-per-view buy rates, and I don't think he has. But watching Colby Covington's career, kind of strange. There was one clip going around today of him like lightly drilling against someone with the gloves on. Dutch drilling, as they sometimes call it. But he throws a jab and a left straight, quote unquote, and his elbow comes up above his head. And people were like, what the fuck is that? And I almost did, well, I'm going to do it at some point. I was going to put out a video about Chris Arreola and various people who, like, the way that they punched wasn't right, or the way that they did things wasn't right, but maybe they had an injury or something like that made them do it weird. And the fact that they did it weird made them harder to deal with. Chris Arreola's right straight is the one that I'm always thinking about, because, I mean, just recently, I say 2021, I think it was, he fought Andy Ruiz shortly after Andy Ruiz had lost the world title to AJ. And he's catching him with this right straight that Andy Ruiz is a pretty good defensive boxer. Andy Ruiz is probably one of the better skilled boxers in the heavyweight division. And Chris Arreola is catching him with this weird overhand. It's like, it's a straight because it extends towards his opponent, but his elbow comes either out to the side or up overhead, and he can't not throw it like that. I've been watching footage of him training. I've been watching footage of him on the mitts. I've been watching footage of him shadow boxing, and his elbow still comes out like a wing. I've heard that he injured his shoulder very early in his career, and that made him throw the punch like that. But it's crazy because to throw it straight, or a straight line in front of him, because his elbow comes out so wide, he has to throw his head off to the left. So he's got this weird punch that comes over the top, and then, like, if the opponent slips, it comes down on them. And it's like the R-worded punch that Covington is throwing in this clip. But I was going to do something about that because obviously Joe Frazier broke his arm and couldn't straighten it properly, and that's why he became so good at the left hook. And there's examples of other people from other sports. The half guard exists because a guy called Gordo in Brazil couldn't close his legs around people because he had a knee injury. So he just worked on developing his half guard into the sort of more modern half guard we see today. There's a baseball player called Malachi. Was it Malachi Brown? Great name, Malachi. But he had, I think it was the missing top of the index finger. So he had to hold the ball weird. But it made him really good at putting spin on the ball or making it curve. Yeah, it's an idea. It's going to be a video. I'm going to do it at some point. But Covington striking kind of so-so. I mean, he did fine against Kamaru, and he tends to be a volume striker. A lot of what he does is like the high. Well, in recent years, he loves the left high kick to level change. I was watching a lot of his takedowns. Well, I was watching these fights, but I was having to watch the takedowns specifically, and he has a couple of interesting looks like that ankle pick. Was it mixed martial? What was his name? Mixed martial armchair or something like that? Or MMA armchair coach? He did an interesting video about cage wrestling, and he pointed out this ankle pick that Colby Covington did to Robbie Lawler. And I went back and he's attempted it in all his fights because he's very good, or like the standard takedown that was ruling MMA for a while, because Colby's been in the UFC since like 2014 or something. It's a long old time. But the takedown that was number one for a very long time was to get your hands locked under their butt and double leg them, along the fence this is. And the answer to that has been to spread the legs wide into what they call sometimes a runner's stance, or like the old karate taekwondo style stances. You spread your legs real wide facing one way. So you turn your hips and you face one way. And Colby's answer to that is to come down low. So he keeps the underhook and he slides down really low, puts his head on the knee of what would be the opponent's front leg in the direction that they're looking, and pulls out the ankle. And it's a really cool little takedown that he does. But he goes back and forth between that and coming up and trying to lock his legs for the double leg. I think got good upper body work stuff too. But I think the really interesting thing was watching these Colby Covington fights, how laser focused he is on the takedown, and how aggressive he is, and how much locking his hands and putting his head in get him into trouble. So obviously the example of Wally Alves guillotining him is a very good one, because Wally Alves, he gets the overhook along the fence, and he uses his other forearm to frame under Colby's jaw, and he pushes his head back so far that Colby sort of stumbles backwards and falls over. And the only other time I've seen that was Francis Ngannou back in the day before he could defend a takedown, really. Just after the period where he was using his chin to dig into that dude's eye to try and get out of the clinch. But he did it to someone and made them fall over backwards. But yeah, Wally Alves is using this frame so much, he's driving Covington's head away. And Covington just buries his head and tries to drive back in. And that's the moment that Alves releases it and whips his hand over the top and grabs the guillotine because he knows Colby's driving in with his head down. But there's plenty of examples of Colby, both his hands locked around the opponent and when he hits the mat, he tends to put his hands on the mat a lot. So he has a lot of trouble with Kimuras. Mike Pyle snapped up a couple. There was that striker he fought, what was his name? Jonathan Munier. I think Max Griffin almost put one up his back. He's had quite a bit of trouble with the Kimura. What you don't see Colby have a lot of trouble with is people intercepting him on his shots and things. He's generally pretty good at getting in safely. Southpaw versus Orthodox, because he's the Southpaw, he throws a left high kick and level changes a lot. He also does a lot of outside step, outside reach, which is, so his right foot goes outside the opponent's lead foot, his head goes outside their lead shoulder, and he reaches out with his right hand and grabs their knee, or grabs behind their knee. If you're really nasty, you grab the knee tendon with your fingers, you hook them in. But he does good work with that. He can pick up the single and run them to the fence, which I'm always talking about as a great move. But he also does a great thing where he does that and then steps through and drives his left shoulder into the opponent's chest and picks up the other leg on the other side, so he gets a sort of high double leg. But that head outside the lead shoulder and grab the lead leg is like it's a completely spammable entry. You can just do it over and over again because you're not putting yourself in much danger because you're going outside the opponent's lead shoulder, so you're taking yourself away from their rear hand. They'd have to pull back to hit you with their lead hand. And obviously no knees, because the rear knees are what's loaded up and the lead knees are not going to touch you if your head's outside the lead shoulder. And you're not doing an awful lot of work, so you just pick it up and run towards the fence, and if you get them to the fence, great. If you get a takedown because they're stumbling around, great. If you don't, you can come up throwing punches. Problem is that doesn't really happen against fellow Southpaws. Fellow Southpaws, he tends to lean outside their lead shoulder when they punch and things like that, and he tends to open himself up more to sort of guillotines and things. He really does go in and sort of head down. But he's fought a few Southpaws, Lawler, Dos Anjos, Maya, I mean, all those guys in a row. Dong Hyun Kim. Jesus, 2017. Man, this guy has not done a lot recently. What have you done for me lately? Obviously, Usman fights Southpaw and Orthodox, but predominantly Southpaw. Woodley and Masvidal, both Orthodox fighters and both washed. But Leon Edwards, we talked about his style a lot before. I really need to write something about his style because I haven't really done a deep dive on it. Bruh. This has been a preview of the much longer Jack Slack Boicast, which I drop every week and you can find on my Patreon. Cheers!